Draal, the chief strategist of the Nax Hunters Guild, faced a dilemma of cosmic proportions. It wasn't a problem solvable by advanced weaponry or self-help seminars, it was an existential crisis. They had apprehended what they believed to be the galaxy's most dangerous being, a human, and no one could decide what to do with her. The mission to retrieve this supposed apex predator from her native planet had been fraught with peril. Their reconnaissance team had nearly disintegrated themselves trying to navigate a revolving door, a common human contraption. Their cloak vessel had almost been compromised when they underestimated the disruptive nature of freely available wireless internet signals. And their universal translators struggled to interpret strange human utterances like, "Are you kidding me?" a phrase their captive had repeated frequently during her apprehension. It sounded threatening, yet strangely self-deprecating. Draal, the Nax Hunters Guild's lead strategist, found himself grappling with a predicament of immense proportions. This wasn't a matter resolvable with superior firepower or personal development courses, it was a profound, existential quandary. They had captured what they considered the galaxy's most formidable creature, a human, and no consensus could be reached on her fate. The mission to extract this so-called ultimate predator from her home world had been riddled with difficulties. Their scouting party had practically vaporized themselves navigating a revolving door, a standard human device. Their camouflaged ship had narrowly avoided detection when they underestimated the disruptive influence of readily accessible Wi-Fi signals. Their universal translators strained to decipher peculiar human expressions like, "Are you kidding me?" which their captive had uttered repeatedly during her apprehension. The phrase sounded aggressive, yet strangely self-deprecating. Now, Draal presided over a lengthy, dramatically curved table aboard the Nax flagship, the Grand Pursuit. He was encircled by his colleagues, each possessing 3 heads, resembling a highly agitated hydra as they bickered amongst themselves. "We cannot permit her to survive." "Humans are notorious for their cunning and savagery," exclaimed Verk Cotone, their weapons master, gesticulating wildly with all 6 arms. "Their kind once domesticated wolves for companionship. They're insane." Yes, we've all perused the Human Threat Compendium," Draal responded with a dismissive wave. The compendium, a 12-volume tome penned by a Nax anthropologist who had evidently never set foot on Earth, overflowed with ominous warnings. Humans could allegedly subsist solely on coffee for extended periods. Their laughter was purportedly a mating call that disoriented and bewildered prey. Most alarmingly, they were rumored to have perfected the art of sarcasm, a weaponized form of irony potent enough to dissolve egos. "But this particular human doesn't appear menacing," muttered Trenyoth, their chief biologist, gazing at the holographic projection of the captured human. Maggie, a logistics specialist and hobbyist baker, sat cross-legged within the containment cell, consuming a protein bar. She wore a placid expression, as though pondering whether a generic brand cola could legitimately be called cola. "Appearances can be deceptive," thundered Verk. "She's likely orchestrating her escape at this very instant." "Looks can be deceiving," Verk thundered. "She's probably already plotting her escape." Unseen by the anxious aliens, Maggie wasn't plotting an escape, she was pondering the ubiquitous nature of terrible fluorescent lighting, particularly its overuse in office settings. The glare in her cell was inducing a headache. Her abduction had occurred at the most inopportune moment imaginable, mid-Costco run. 1 minute she was comparing battery brands, the next she was surrounded by beings resembling a bizarre hybrid of squid and overcaffeinated librarian. They babbled incoherently, brandished glowing devices, and shoved her into a gleaming, egg-shaped vessel. To her mild annoyance, they'd also confiscated her shopping cart, which contained a highly coveted box of frozen mini cheesecakes. "Of course this would happen to me," she'd muttered, more irritated than frightened. Maggie wasn't fearless, she was just profoundly weary, the kind of weary that rendered alien abduction just another Monday. Back on the Grand Pursuit, the Nax continued their heated discussion. "We must hunt her. To prove our dominance." Verk insisted, advocating a contest of intellect and aggression. "A trial of wits? Have you seen their species reality television?" Draal retorted. "That's not a game we're likely to win." But Verk remained steadfast. "This is our chance to solidify our legacy." The galaxy needs to know that the Nax are the ultimate hunters. I don't care about legacy, Drall grumbled, I care about survival. Has anyone even bothered to determine if humans are venomous? The room fell silent. A quiet murmur rippled through the assembled Nax. Janek finally spoke, technically, all humans are venomous. They secrete toxins when they perspire. It's a thermoregulatory mechanism. Drall stared at her, aghast. You mean she's actively leaking poison right now? Well, yes, but only in trace amounts. I knew it. HFY shrieked, leaping to his feet, tentacles trembling. We can't let her perspire on us. It would be catastrophic. Meanwhile, Maggie stretched and yawned. The cell was reasonably comfortable, if a bit drafty. She squinted at the small alien drone hovering outside the energy field, observing her with unnerving curiosity. She leaned towards it and whispered conspiratorially, "So, where do you guys keep the snacks?" The drone emitted a nervous beep and zipped away. Drall's patience was wearing thin. Fine, he conceded. Let us hunt her. But mark my words, if she turns out to be more dangerous than we anticipated, I'm holding Verk responsible. Oh, please, HFY scoffed. What's the worst that could happen? In her cell, Maggie grinned. She didn't know what the aliens had planned, but she knew one thing: if they thought she was going to cooperate without making it difficult, they were in for a very rude awakening. Unseen by the anxious aliens, Maggie wasn't plotting a breakout, she was contemplating the pervasive nature of awful fluorescent lighting, especially its overuse in workplaces. The glare within her confinement was causing a headache. Her capture had transpired at the worst possible time, during a Costco trip. One moment she was comparing battery brands, the next she was encircled by creatures resembling a peculiar hybrid of squid and overcaffeinated librarians. They jabbered incomprehensibly, brandished luminous gadgets, and shoved her into a gleaming, ovoid craft. Much to her chagrin, they'd also confiscated her shopping cart, which held a highly desirable box of frozen mini cheesecakes. Naturally, this would happen to me, she'd grumbled, more irritated than scared. Maggie wasn't brave, she was just utterly exhausted, the kind of exhausted that made alien abduction feel like another Monday. Aboard the Grand Pursuit, the Nax continued their fervent debate. We must pursue her. As a testament to our supremacy. Verk insisted, advocating for a contest of intelligence and strength. A battle of wits? Have you witnessed their species' reality television? Drall retorted. That's not a contest we're apt to win. Yet Verk was resolute. This is our chance to solidify our position. The cosmos must recognize that the Nax are the ultimate hunters. Legacy doesn't concern me, Drall muttered, survival does. Has anybody even ascertained if humans are poisonous? The chamber grew hushed. A low hum reverberated through the assembled Nax. Janek finally broke the silence. Technically, all humans are toxic. They emit poisons through their perspiration. It's a temperature regulation process. Drall gazed at her, horrified. You're suggesting she's actively exuding venom right now? Indeed, though only in minuscule quantities. I told you. HFY shrieked, jumping to his feet, tentacles quivering. We mustn't permit her to sweat upon us. It could prove devastating. Meanwhile, Maggie stretched her legs and yawned. The holding area was relatively cozy, if a little drafty. She narrowed her eyes at the little alien drone floating just beyond the energy field, staring at her with an unnerving inquisitiveness. She leaned closer to it and whispered conspiratorially, "Say, where do you fellows store the munchies?" The drone emitted a worried peep and darted away. Drall's patience was dwindling. Fine, he conceded. Letten can hunt her. However, I'm warning you, if she proves more perilous than we anticipate, I'm holding Verk accountable. Oh, really? HFY scoffed. What's the absolute worst-case scenario? Within her cell, Maggie smirked. She was unaware of the aliens' plans, but she was certain of one thing: if they believed she would comply without a struggle, they were sorely mistaken. Maggie had always considered herself a woman of average intelligence and slightly above average frustration. However, it didn't require a genius to deduce what was happening. The aliens perceived her as a threat. Dangerous. The last time she'd been in a physical altercation, it had been over the last decent coffee mug in the office break room. She lost. Yet here she was, being treated like some kind of galactic apex predator. The realization struck her somewhere between the seventh drone anxiously buzzing near her cell and the excessively formal pre-hunt announcement displayed on the cell wall, written in what could only be described as Comic Sans for psychopaths. It read, "Greetings, terrifying human. Prepare to be pursued in the grand hunt. Any attempts to utilize your terrifying abilities will be met with swift and honorable retaliation. Have a nice day." Terrifying abilities? Maggie muttered, squinting at the message. Do they think I'm Batman? She snorted and leaned back against the uncomfortable bench. Clearly, these aliens had never encountered an actual human. If they had, they'd know the most dangerous thing she'd ever wielded was a paperclip during a particularly tedious conference call. Still, Maggie wasn't foolish. She had watched enough subpar science fiction films to know that if someone believed you were dangerous, it was best to let them continue believing that, at least for the time being. She stood, adjusted her ponytail with an air of feigned menace, it was mostly static cling, and stared directly at the surveillance drone. "I hope you're ready," she said with a smirk, "because I certainly am." The drone emitted a distressed chirp and zipped out of the room as if its very existence depended on it. Meanwhile, aboard the command deck of the Grand Pursuit, anxiety was escalating. She spoke to the surveillance drone. FCash hissed, his tentacles writhing in alarm. Did you hear her tone? Cold, calculating. She's clearly devising something. She's just standing in a room, FCash, Dryle snapped, rubbing the bridge of his nose in exasperation. For all we know, she's contemplating how to avoid leg cramps. Or how to give **** cramps, FCash countered dramatically. Never underestimate a human, Dryle. You've seen the files, they invented pineapple on pizza. A collective shudder rippled through the room. Dryle rolled all three of his eyes. Fine. If she's so dangerous, why hasn't she escaped yet? She's lulling us into a false sense of security, FCash declared, slamming his many fists on the table. It's a classic human tactic. As the Nax devolved into another heated argument, Trenyoth, their chief biologist, leaned toward Dryle and whispered, "If you ask me, this is all a bit excessive. She seems quite underwhelming." "Unassuming is how they get you," Dryle muttered back. "Never trust a creature with eyebrows. It's unnatural." Back in her cell, Maggie was assessing her situation. The energy barrier surrounding her confinement was definitely impenetrable, though she'd briefly entertained the notion of using the protein bar wrapper as some sort of conductor. She discarded the idea when she recalled failing high school physics twice. Instead, she opted for a different approach at honesty, seasoned with a generous helping of sarcasm. When the next drone arrived to deliver her pre-hunt briefing, she leaned forward and said, "Listen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not dangerous. I'm barely coordinated enough to fold a fitted sheet. Do you even know what that is?" She gestured emphatically. "It's like wrestling an octopus." "No offense." The drone hovered uncertainly, as if processing this new data. Then, it emitted a series of frantic beeps and sped off, presumably to inform its squid-like superiors that the human had attempted communication in code. The briefing finally arrived, projected holographically and narrated by what sounded like a sentient car alarm. It outlined the rules of the hunt, which were few. Maggie would be released onto a hostile alien planet, and the Nax would track her. If she survived for 3 galactic days, she would be allowed to live. The tone of the narration suggested this was an incredibly magnanimous offer. "Live?" Maggie scoffed, throwing her hands up. "What do they think I'm going to do, die of boredom? I survived Thanksgiving dinner with my Aunt Karen and her conspiracy theories about birds. Bring it on." Despite her bravado, a growing sense of unease gnawed at her. She wasn't a soldier or a spy. she was a woman who color-coded her pantry for fun. And yet, somehow, these aliens believed she was some sort of intergalactic Rambo. She couldn't decide if it was flattering or insulting. On the command deck, Verk was practically vibrating with excitement. "It is time. Release the human." Dral sighed. "Fine. But if she turns the tables on us, I'm not cleaning up the mess." The energy barrier around Maggie's cell shimmered and vanished. She stepped out cautiously, squinting at the dramatic red lighting in the corridor. "What is it with these guys and mood lighting?" she muttered, already strategizing how to survive whatever nonsense they had planned. The hunt had begun, but Maggie had a sneaking suspicion the Nax had grossly underestimated just how resourceful humans could be when pushed to their limits, or even just mildly inconvenienced. Maggie's initial impression of the alien hunting grounds was that it resembled a poorly designed theme park, not the enjoyable kind with overpriced treats and photo opportunities, but the kind where exorbitant fees were charged to be pursued by individuals in shoddy werewolf costumes. The sky presented a disconcerting chartreuse hue, and the terrain was strewn with jagged rocks, bubbling pools of questionable liquid, and vegetation that appeared poised to file restraining orders. Taking a cautious step, she immediately registered a loud squelching sound beneath her boot. Looking down, she observed what seemed to be an alien slug vigorously attempting to slime its way up her leg. "Oh no, you don't," Maggie muttered, kicking it off with a satisfying plop. "I've seen this movie, and I'm not about to become anyone's parasitic host, thank you very much." The slug emitted what sounded remarkably like a disappointed fart before slithering away. Back on the Nax command ship, Verk was fixated on the monitor displaying Maggie's every movement. He leaned forward, a predatory grin on his face. "Observe her," he hissed. Stalking the terrain with such confidence, already neutralizing potential threats. "A born hunter." Dral squinted at the screen. "She's walking and kicked a slug." "That's hardly stalking." "It's subtle," Verk retorted. "Humans are masters of deception." "She's likely analyzing the topography for strategic advantages." Dral sighed and turned to Tren. "Have we actually checked the human for weapons?" Tren hesitated. "Well, there was a problem with the scanners." "What sort of problem?" "They kept malfunctioning every time she made a sarcastic remark." Dral groaned, burying his faces in his hands. As Maggie traversed the alien landscape, she couldn't help but notice the contrived nature of the whole setup. Sure, there were ominous sounds in the distance and the occasional tree attempted to consume her shoelaces, but for the most part, it was just her and the rocks. Lots of rocks. Big ones, small ones, and some that looked suspiciously like faces glaring at her. "Honestly," she muttered, sidestepping a particularly aggressive patch of moss, "if this is their idea of a death trap, I'd like to speak to their budget committee." Her grumbling was interrupted by a low growl from behind. Turning slowly, she encountered a creature that appeared to be the result of blending a wolf, a crocodile, and a porcupine, then pressing the frappe button. It bared its teeth, or were those claws? And took a menacing step toward her. "Okay," Maggie said, holding up her hands. "Let's discuss this. You don't eat me, and I don't figure out how to turn you into a very uncomfortable pair of boots. Deal?" The creature lunged. Maggie narrowly dodged, landing in a graceless heap behind a boulder. Scrambling to her feet, she grabbed the closest object she could find, a rock roughly the size of a cantaloupe, and hurled it at the beast. It struck the creature squarely on whatever passed for its nose. The beast paused, blinked, then turned tail and fled, emitting a high-pitched squeal. "Well," Maggie said, brushing dirt off her pants. "That wasn't terrifying at all." "Nope, totally fine." Back on the ship, the Nax were in an uproar. "Did you see that?" Verk roared. "She didn't even flinch. She's a natural predator." Dral rubbed his temples. "She flinched. She flinched very hard. She threw a rock. This isn't exactly groundbreaking strategy. It's psychological warfare." Verk insisted. "Look at her. She's toying with her prey. First the slug, now the beast. What's next?" Us? Tren, meanwhile, was furiously taking notes. This is fascinating, she muttered. Humans appear to have an innate ability to manipulate their environment using, what is it called again? Common sense? Dryle suggested.